Thank you, guys. And would you all join me in welcoming my good friend, the writer, director, and producer of the movie you just saw, Mr. Rawson Marshall Thurber. Oh, this is where we just sit down and pretend to have a natural conversation.
Yeah, let's do that. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to watch this movie in the summertime.
So I got to see the movie on Monday night at the ArcLight with a huge crowd of journalists. And when I knew I was going to see the movie with a crowd of journalists, I got really nervous because that's not your summer blockbuster crowd. But I have to say, they were gasping and applauding and puckering throughout the entire experience, as was I. And everyone had an amazing time watching this movie, myself included. And I was struck by two things. Number one, this is, in general, a movie that doesn't really get made a lot anymore. And people are going to say, well, what are you talking about? It's The Rock, and it's, you know, an action movie.
Every other movie gets The Rock, right?
It is an original screenplay, not based on intellectual property, not a sequel, not a reboot, not a remake, and it is a unapologetically fun, kick-ass summer blockbuster, the likes of which they made when we were kids. You know, Towering Inferno, Die Hard, obviously. We've talked about Cliffhanger. We can name the entire Rennie Harlin catalog for you. Sure. But I was struck by, I've known you for a long time, and I first became aware of you as a director on Dodgeball, a true underdog story.
Thank you.
Come on.
Thanks. That's really nice.
Got to give it up for Dodgeball, which, by the way, is still a great movie. It's still hilarious. And then watched as you went on to We're the Millers, went on to Central Intelligence, where you obviously, you know, met Dwayne, and we'll talk about that. But I was really struck by, this is a completely different type of movie for you. It's a type of, not only is it a huge action movie, it's an extremely visual effects driven movie. And so I thought what we could talk about, at least to start off with, and we'll be, you know, throwing it to the audience too for some questions, but what is it about, because we have a lot of directors here, a lot of filmmakers in here, what is it that you find different about directing a movie of this size, and what is it that you find the same no matter what movie you've directed? Because you've directed now, you know, comedies that are this big, and you've directed obviously this massive summer tentpole movie.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you.
I have nothing else to do, I promise you.
That's not true.
I'm happy to be here.
You're a really good friend, and I wanted a good friend on the stage with me, so thank you. And it's really nice to be back at USC. I graduated in the 1900s. Fight on. Went to the Peter Stark program. Yeah, right on. We have some Starkies here. Cool. So anyways, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Can I just interrupt? Am I the only one who thinks this guy's too good looking to be a director? He looks like Hitman number 2 from
Bland White Guy 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get used to it. I'm sorry.
So directing.
Directing, yes. Oh, so right. Yeah. So, well, the question you asked is a really smart one, and the way you frame it is exactly correct, which is, you know, a lot of it is the same, right? Whether you're making a movie that costs over $100 million, or whether you're making a movie that's, you know, $10,000, it's almost always the same stuff, which is not enough money, not enough time, right? It doesn't matter what you're making. I think anybody here will attest to that. And you're always solving problems, and the thing you thought you had doesn't work, or, you know, the actual sort of blocking and tackling of making a movie doesn't change. You know, in terms of, you know, I made a bunch of comedies leading up to this one, and you know, what is different about making an action picture, and I've wanted to make one since I was 8 years old. My mom took me to see Raiders of the Lost Ark in this little 2-screen theater in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and I just fell in love with movies and fell in love with action pictures in that moment. You know, so I wanted to do this for a very, very long time. But what is different is when you make just a straight action picture is two things really. The level of preparation is very different than on, say, a kind of down the middle domestic comedy, and the level of support is very different as well. So, for instance, on Central Intelligence, which was action comedy, kind of a blend, and Miller's, the prep side is a little more contained. I wouldn't call it simple, but it's not lengthy, right? Because you're basically talking pretty straightforward gags that have been done a million times in terms of the physical side. But when you're making a movie like this, there's a super crane jump, there's a turbine sequence, there's the Hall of Mirrors in finger quotes, my nod to Lady from Shanghai. That at the end of the movie, there's so much preparation, so many conversations, and you have so many departments that are there to help support whatever that thing is you're trying to achieve, whatever that vision is, whatever that goal. So you've got stunt coordinator, second unit director, which I'd never really had until this film, which has pluses and minuses. You have your VFX, you have special effects, you have pre-viz, you have storyboards, pre-viz, and then post-viz, which I didn't even know existed until I made this movie. I'm like, what the fuck is post-viz? And like, oh, it's this. I'm like, oh, well, that's helpful.
What the fuck is post-viz?
So post-viz is, as it kind of sounds, right? Like after you've pre-viz and you've shot, and then they put together very early and quick and dirty versions of your sequences, right? Of your sequence, especially like in the mirror sequence, the sphere sequence at the end. They put it together very, very quickly and say, is this what you want? After you've shot your principal photography, and then they start dialing it in from there, because the closer you get to the finish line, as you know, the more the cement dries and the fewer changes you can make. So that's what post-viz is. Oh, we'll just post-visit. And I remember the first time that was said, and I was like, I don't know what that. And I think one of the only things that has helped me, one of the major things that has helped me is like I don't mind looking stupid, so I don't mind saying I don't know what that is. What could you please explain that to me? Like I was 6, and that's gotten me a long way. So there is a little bit of fake it till you make it, but also don't be afraid to ask a question.
James Mangold, director of Walk the Line and Logan, 310 to Yuma, a ton of amazing movies. I was lucky enough to have a conversation with him about, similarly, his approach to directing these bigger movies, and he said, going from a movie like Walk the Line to a movie like, Logan, for instance, is like going from being the captain of a fishing boat to the captain of a Carnival cruise ship.
That's much better said than me.
Well, why didn't you just say it? And
I
should save us all. No.
But
do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's so many more moving pieces. But I think but it also kind of goes the other way. Like, I loved making this movie. I had so much fun, and in almost every way, it was easier than making a comedy. And here's why: when you're making an action picture like this, there's so much planning and prep, and then you call action, and the car either blows up or it doesn't. Right? You don't go, oh, could that blow up funnier? Right? It doesn't really work like that. But on a comedy, if it's not funny, as the writer-director, if it's not working, it's up to me and it's up to that actor, and there is no post-viz that can help you at all, right? Or pre-viz or any of that stuff. So it's really like I found myself much more relaxed making this movie than any of the comedies that I've ever made, and it's so nice. It's so nice to make a movie where you don't have to make people laugh 3 times a minute. It's like a vacation.
Is that preparation part of that relaxation, and meaning that by the time you step on set, the movie is really fully realized in a way, whether through boards, previs, animatics, and everything, and tests, and so that you're saying is sort of a freeing thing for a director, where you're at that point you're just capturing what you've already sort of planned to the letter.
Yeah, I think I wish I planned more to the letter, but yes, you have a much better sense of what you're trying to capture, what you're trying to achieve, mostly because that stuff has to get prepared beforehand, and there's a lot of safety issues that you have to take into account. But I will say that there's still plenty of room within that box to be creative, to pick your angles, to pick your your moments to realize when something's not working, and change it. So that part of it is some of the stuff I love the most.
Can you give us an example of a moment on this movie where you were there and you just like, this isn't working, and how you dealt with that?
Well, the only one that comes to mind is one that that we couldn't fix, and is kind of a sort of a wah-wah in the movie, which is there's a sequence on the bridge, right, in the park fire in the bridge, and Noah Taylor shows up and pulls the gun on Nev, and then you see Dwayne yell "Sarah" as he comes around, and he's holding this axe, and Noah turns around, and then Dwayne sort of freight trains him off the side, right? So when we shot it, what was supposed to happen is Noah Taylor, has the gun on Nev, and then suddenly you hear Sarah, and then thunk. There's this big axe in the back of Noah, and he's got a giant axe in his back, and turns just as Dwayne freight trains him. And there's so many things that worked against us when we were shooting it. One, Noah Taylor's about 85 pounds after lunch. And so I went, oh shit! When I saw Dwayne's a giant man with a giant axe, and as soon as Noah Taylor got, we had the prop axe in the back, and I'm like, this is fucking terrible.
It would have chopped him in half.
Oh my god! It would have knocked him into the sequel. There's no, I mean, and I'm just staring at it, and I'm like, we are so fucked. What am I gonna do? And so as soon as it was one of those ones, and I think all the directors out there will know, when you just see it for the first time, you've talked about it, this should work, and it's, and then you see it for the first time, and you're like, oh, there's no planet where this is going to work. So that was something that we there was not much I could do on the day other than get a couple safety pieces, which I did, and then in post and editorial, my fantastic editors, Mike Sale and Julian Clark, we just sort of cut it back as far as we could, and just cut the axe piece completely out, and have Dwayne knock him off the side, and that's one of those ones, where you just try to do no harm at that point. You're like, look, if we can just get through this part without people leaving the theater, and then we're fine.
Just taking a quick unscientific poll, did anyone felt that part ruined the movie? No. Okay, great. Okay, so just as usual,
I will sleep
the
tonight.
Director overthinking
my God.
the thing that we didn't even perceive.
See, well, that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point. I will only know that now. Apparently, everybody else. So please don't tweet that.
I want to ask you some process stuff. But you mentioned that this was the first time you really had a second unit director. Just for the rest of us, can you tell us, and that there were good things about it and bad things?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what, first of all, a second unit director does mainly on a film like this?
Sure.
And what were the parts that weren't so great?
Great question. So J.J. Perry was our second unit director, and he's a fabulous guy. And he's completely gung ho. He's sort of like a, super positive, kind of like a golden retriever on cocaine. He's ready to do anything. 85 setups a day, and sometimes isn't the best idea, but he was fantastic. And the best part of having a second unit director is that you have somebody who's going to go dig a ditch for you, right? They're going to go set up a car sort of T-bone or an explosion, and that can take all day to set up, or frankly all night for one shot, right? So they'll go do that. You've talked about it. You know the angles. They've done it enough to know what are the most effective angles for the gag. You've talked about style and blah 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 blah. So in that particular case, that's the great part of a second unit director. I personally want to do that stuff because that's why
that's the fun stuff.
That's the fun stuff, right? And but in this particular case, we had a release date, and so we had to shoot simultaneously. So that was probably the best part, is that you have a second unit. We had a 70-day main unit shoot and about a 25-day second unit shoot that was shooting concomitantly. So you get your movie done more quickly, and you can, we had a 27-week post on this, which with 1,700 visual effects shots.
That's fast.
Is bonkers bad idea. Don't do that.
Yeah. I'm surprised it was 70 main unit days. I mean, just for people, that's short for a movie like this. I know it's 70 shooting days sounds like a lot of shooting days.
Yeah, but for something like this, it's
not.
Yeah.
And 25 is I mean, a movie like a Mission Impossible, the one that's, coming out in a few weeks. It's
Double.
probably 100+ main unit days
Yeah.
and at least 75 second unit days,
Yep.
and there's probably a third unit.
Yep.
And an
Yeah,
aerial
splitter unit,
unit,
yep.
and a
There is.
so it's a lot.
It is. Thank you for. Yeah, you're exactly right. And so we about half the time of a movie like this typically, and I would never call this a smaller budget film, but it's certainly not up there with the heavy hitters.
I just want to ask you a couple more process questions, and then I would love if maybe people have questions for you. They could raise hands, and so start thinking of questions you guys might have for Rawson. But just getting back to, you wrote and directed and produced this movie, and I actually remember when you were writing it, and talk to me about the inception of this, where this idea came from, and where the Dwayne of it all came from, because I know you were making a movie with Dwayne, Central Intelligence, for New Line. How did this all come together, and where did this idea for you come from?
Yeah, so we were in post on Central Intelligence, cutting it at Warner's, and I think like any good director, there's nobody can be sick of a movie more than its own director. You watch it so many times, and you're just like, oh my God, anything else? Can I just think about anything else? And I went and saw Creed. I saw Ryan Coogler's Creed, which I just loved, and it reminded me how great Stallone is. And I went on this whole sort of Stallone binge. I watched all his movies, even Rhinestone, and thank you. And I watched Cliffhanger again. And I just loved it, and the thing that really struck me is at the beginning of Cliffhanger. If you hadn't seen it, it's I think a 1991 or 1992 Rennie Harlan picture with Stallone.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought
No.
Oh,
I was going to say, if you haven't seen Cliffhanger, you need to remedy that.
Yeah.
It's the epitome of what the Rennie Harlan 90s blockbuster was all about.
Yeah.
Like it's
Lithgow and
beyond ridiculous. Can I do my Lithgow line from No One Will Know with it? Kill one person and they call you a murderer. Kill a million and they call you a conqueror.
Yeah, it's
Sorry.
perfect. Nailed it.
It's like John Lithgow was right here with all of us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Anyway.
But you're exactly right.
Thank you. No, please. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. See, great job. But I'm going to spoil some of Cliffhanger. There's an opening in Cliffhanger where there's a damsel hanging by a wire over a big ravine, and Stallone plays like a Rocky Mountain Ranger, and he goes out on the wire to try to save her, and he's holding her by her hand. She's got like a climbing glove, and he's holding her, as the wire's breaking, and she says, "Don't drop me." And he's, it's Stallone. He's got his big arm, all these veins, and he's like,
she has a teddy bear also for some reason, which is ridiculous. So you can see that, just so you can get the shot of the teddy bear falling.
And her glove slips through his hands, and she falls to her death. Sorry, the movie's good after that too, but it just struck me that it's such a great cold open where the hero fails, and that opening failure is the thing that haunts him for the coming narrative, and the coming narrative is the thing that exorcises that demon, that heals that pain, and I just hadn't seen that done in a while, and I really liked it, and I loved working with Dwayne, and that guy made a straight up. He called me to make Central Intelligence. Like, he saw Miller's and he's like, I want to make a comedy, and I love Miller's and I want to do Central, and I was like, fucking sweet, let's do that. And then but after he did a straight up comedy, and then he goes and does a musical. He does Moana, and like, this guy is just absolutely fearless. But in his action films, which I think are great, he essentially plays a superhero without a cape, right? Like, he plays a bulletproof giant, right? More or less, and those are fun. But I wanted to try to do something different, right? I wanted to show him vulnerable. I wanted to show him weak. Like, typically in a typical sort of rock picture, like that opening farmhouse scene, like, he's gonna save the day, right? He'll save the thing, and then they'll either crack a joke or a beer or both, and you move on. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to grab the audience by the lapels a little bit and say, this is going to be slightly different. It's still a straight up cheeseburger, but maybe with like pepper jack cheese on the top. So it's like just a little different.
But dad has a suicide vest and kills his son in the first
but,
like
something light like that.
Shit gets real.
Yeah, sure. Shit gets real, and then there's a price that's paid, and then I talked a lot about this with Dwayne, and I called him up I said, I got an idea. I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff. I called him up and said, I got an idea. And he said, yeah, what's the idea? And then I pitched it to him, and he said, I love it, I'm in. And then we went around town and pitched it and sold it, and then I wrote it, and then we shot it, and then cut it, and then we're here. So that was kind of the process.
And it's always that easy, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
It's really, well, we were actually from
Right.
pitch to principal photography in 10 months. So no script.
And that's typical for Hollywood.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
It's
Right.
it's
Also typical is calling Dwayne Johnson and saying, "Hey, I have an idea," and he goes, "I'm in," on the phone.
Yeah. Well, that would be my advice to everyone out there. If you
Be friends with Dwayne Johnson. Yeah. Okay.
If you're going into a pitch, my advice would be attach Dwayne Johnson,
Right.
because they really like that.
Yeah.
And it helps. So, anyways, but wanting to, we talked a lot about wanting to have Dwayne play a character that has to think his way out of problems as opposed to punch his way out. Right. That a hero that's vulnerable, that just barely survives. Like, he's beaten and bloodied and battered, and his ass gets kicked like almost the whole movie.
My last question is sort of about that. And by the way, I thought that was fundamentally one of the really, really smart, maybe the smartest thing you did in the writing of this movie is, Dwayne Johnson, without one false leg, there's no way he doesn't make the tower jump, the crane jump.
Yeah.
I'm not puckering like I was. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what you have to do to a guy with that kind of physicality and that kind of, on-screen presence.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very, very smart. But my question is, you recently had a screening of the movie.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, for an audience of amputees.
Yeah. This just happened. What day is this? Thursday?
This is Thursday.
This is Thursday.
Rawson's been in Beijing, Hong Kong, New York, and just got off the plane to LA. So he is a trooper tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I've traveled. I've been on planes. Thank you. Thanks, very kind. So last night, the Rusk Institute, which is a leading institute in New York for people suffering with dealing with limb loss or amputation, and I haven't talked about this publicly yet, but this is my first time saying anything about it publicly, and I can't tell you what it was like. We had about 100 people in their institute in a room. We played the movie for them. They didn't know we were going to show up, and as Dwayne and I walked in, and the place went crazy, and they were just
primarily for you, or
it was mostly me. No, of course, you just sort of stand just to the edge of the spotlight, and it's totally fine. But it was like thunderous applause. There were tears. They kept we couldn't really answer questions, so they kept clapping, and I can't tell you how nervous I was about screening for them, and how nervous Dwayne was, because we worked incredibly hard researching amputees and talking with that community, and it was so important to me and incredibly important to Dwayne to get it right. But we didn't know if we got it right. We had talked to a few of our sort of friends in that community, and they said, "Oh yeah, we love it." But we screened it for people who don't give a shit about us, and those guys and women do not suffer fools. They've been through enough. They don't give a fuck, and they'll tell you if you've messed up. And I can't. It was unbelievable. There was this I'm gonna try not to cry. There's this one guy, his name's Ricardo. He's an older guy, and he's in a wheelchair, and he had a prosthetic leg. And after the screening, we were hanging out and talking, and he pulled me aside, and he said he didn't want to say anything in front of everybody because he doesn't speak English very well, and he was kind of shy. And he says that he'd given up walking because it was too painful for him with his prosthetic. And but then after watching the movie, that he's decided he's going to try to walk again. So that happened to me last night, and I know that sounds silly with a big dumb action movie, but I mean, that's something I'll never forget. And who cares about anything else? What happened last night with these people and how they felt seen, and felt they're so used to seeing amputees as villains if they're ever cast at all, and to see an amputee hero, especially the biggest action star in the world, just shine a spotlight on this, and that the problem that with Dwayne's character isn't below the knee, it's between the ears in this film. Nobody feels sorry for him. They just embraced it in such a beautiful way, and it was it's the best thing that's ever happened in my career last night.
That's great, man. That's great. If people have questions for us, and we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, you were the first in the back to, so you're going to have to shout really loud just to make sure we hear you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. That So this movie is very fast-paced, and there's not really a lot of time that's slow. It went by really quick, but it's. I'm wondering, from a director's perspective, how do you keep up the pace and not have any like dead time where it gets boring? Because that can happen in a lot of action.
Sure. Have two editors. Yeah, it's a great question, and something that we have been hearing a lot about the movie, that the pace is kind of relentless. I hope in a good way, and that people who have a fear of heights like I do have a pretty intense experience. Well, I think it's the kind of thing where I have two great editors, Julian Clark, who cut Deadpool, and Mike Sale, who's cut my last 3 movies, and they don't care about anything I've written, So I'll walk in and they're like, yeah, I cut that thing out. I'm like, wait, what? I like that thing. Yeah, we don't need it. What? What do you mean we don't? Show it to me. Oh shit, yeah, we don't need it. It was a lot like that, right? But I also think, like, in a movie like this, you're signing up for that experience. You're signing up for the thrill ride, right? The roller coaster, the gripping your seat, and that's part of the contract that you make with the paying audience. I wanted to make something that was heart pounding, but also heartfelt. I hope that it had a core that it was about something. It's about a family. It's about a mother and a father, a husband and a wife who'll do anything they can to keep their family together. Obviously this movie owes a lot to Die Hard, and there's a lot of great stuff in Die Hard. McClane, McTiernan's directing is perfect. Alan Rickman's first feature. By the way, 30 years ago today, it opened. Yeah,
really?
Die Hard. Yeah.
Oh,
Die Hard.
Wow.
Yeah. But what I was going to say about Die Hard is, and it's great, and it's about 3 jokes shy of a straight-up comedy. If you should watch it again. But
also one of the best Christmas movies ever made.
All time, right?
All time.
And if you don't think that's a Christmas movie, I don't want to know you, because it is a Christmas movie. But the thing that people forget about Die Hard, and it's great in all these other ways, but I think a big reason why it is a classic and on Mount Rushmore is because that movie is about a guy trying to get his wife back, trying to repair his marriage. Holly Gennaro, McClane, and John get an argument at the beginning, right? They're separated essentially, and he fucks it up again. He can't keep his dumb mouth shut, and they get an argument. As soon as they get an argument, they're split up by the bad guys, right? And the mid act for that, the mid moment for that, the low point for our hero, or I guess the worst of the worst, end act 2, is McClane in the bathroom pulling glass out of his feet, and he talks to Al, and he says, I want you to tell my wife something. She's heard me say I love you 100 times, but she's never heard me say I'm sorry, and I want you to tell her that. And he's like, you're going to tell her that yourself, buddy, whatever that line is. But that's what that movie's about. And at the end, he gets the girl, he gets his wife back, he repairs his marriage, they hug, she kisses him, and they get in the back of the car, right? And so people, when they rip off Die Hard, which I may have done here, they rip off the wrong thing. Often, and I tried to rip off the right thing with heart.
Yes, you in the front, sir.
I want to say go Mats.
Yeah, all right. Go Mats. Orinda. I went to Miramani High School in Orinda, California, East Bay all day.
Yeah,
Miramani? Go Mats, brother.
I want to know, how did your childhood and adolescence growing up in Orinda affect your filmmaking career?
How did my childhood and adolescence in Orinda affect my filmmaking career? Orinda is a small little town in the East Bay, very quiet, filled with lovely people. I wouldn't quite call it idyllic, but it's very quiet and supportive. I don't know. I guess I loved Orinda. I had a great time growing up there. It felt really safe and secluded. I guess I could just be. It was safe to kind of imagine whatever I wanted to imagine. There, weren't big. It wasn't a big municipality. I guess to me, it was probably more that my folks divorced when I was younger, and so I'd spend summers with my dad in San Diego, and we would go to the movies all the time, and he would just fall asleep, and then I would watch the movies, and we'd go to the same movie 3 or 4 times, and he'd fall asleep, and I knew it was a good movie if he stayed awake, like Silverado or E.T. It was the first time I saw him cry. So I think that, and then my mom loved movies, so like I said, she took me to see Raiders, and very early on we would go whatever movie we saw, we'd be driving back, and she would always say, what were your favorite scenes? And so from a very early stage, like I started to think about scenes in movies as opposed to just a thing, right? A whole thing. But I wish I had a better answer on Orinda. It's a great place to live, and I wish I could raise my family there.
Well, I think that's a pretty good answer, given the fact that it had less to do with the environment probably, and more to do with what was going on in your personal life. I mean,
Yeah, I guess so.
you hear time and time again, creators, storytellers, filmmakers, there's something that drives them emotionally to, I mean, Spielberg famously made, I don't know how many movies about broken families and about trying to put the family back together.
Yeah. Good point.
Rawson, would you like to lay down as I analyze you? I
Oh,
think
no.
Skyscraper is
Well,
a cry for hope.
Anything, it's a
To your daddy.
giant phallus.
You had great editors on this. You had great editors on this
Yes.
movie. You also had a world-class director of photography. Could you tell us who that is?
Yes, Robert Elswit shot this picture, and who is, without question, the greatest living American cinematographer and probably one of the best of all time, regardless of nationality.
What are some of the marquee movies that we would know?
Well, he's basically shot every movie I've ever loved. There Will Be Blood, he won an Academy Award for that. He shot the last 2 Mission Impossibles, not this one. He shot Magnolia, he shot Boogie Nights, he shot... he shot one of my all-time favorite obscure pictures, The Sure Thing, which if you haven't seen, you should. He shot a HBO film called Long Gone. He shot The Night Of on HBO, that series, Steve Zalian series. He shot Michael Clayton, which is a fantastic, fantastic picture.
When you're working with a craftsperson like that, what, as a director, obviously this is someone who's been around longer than you have, who's shot some of the, like you said, some of your favorite movies. How do you approach that relationship?
I mean, I was scared out of my mind, truly. I still don't know why he agreed to make this movie. I really don't. I mean, I think we just paid him a lot, and he had a time. We're like, what do you want? Yep, we take more? Sure, great, come on.
He's got some gambling
debts. He
That's
does.
Right.
He's got some financial issues he has to deal with. But but for me, it was a dream come true. Like when my producer, Beau Flynn, said, hey, send me your list of cinematographers. I said, okay, here's my list. And I sent him 5 names, and the names were Robert Elswit, Robert Elswit, Robert Elswit, Robert Elswit, Robert Elswit, like that. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, that's my list. And then it's a longer story about how we ended up getting him. But yeah, the relationship was unbelievable. It was like a masterclass in lighting a close up, in covering a scene and blocking a scene. And I still remember it was probably the second week of shooting. We were lining up a master shot inside of Zhao's penthouse suite, and there were these chairs that had like gold filigree on the back, and we were lighting he was lighting the shot, and I was just sitting there watching him light, and then I was like, I hope he's gonna throw a litlittle kick light on that gold filigree because it would really pop. And he was, I'm sure he would have done it, but I couldn't wait any longer, and I walked up and I was like, Robert, if it wouldn't, please don't take this the wrong way. If you don't mind, if you could throw a little light on that, because it would be kind of, he said, oh yeah, sure, no problem, watch this. And he was like, he's the nicest guy. He's like
right,
user friendly and very cool.
He didn't pull the old, okay, whatever, Paul Thomas Thurber.
No.
Yeah.
But he's so much smarter than everybody, and also just a complete pro. And I needed that on this film. I'd never made anything like this, and I needed as much help as I can get. And if you can get Robert Elswit to shoot your movie, do it.
So what we've learned is get The Rock to commit to your movie, get Robert Elswit to shoot your movie.
Yeah, get Jim Bissell to design your movie.
Beau Flynn, no slouch as a producer.
$3 billion in box office.
Yeah. Questions for yes, sir, in the middle and the back. Yes, sir.
What do you wish you had known when you were here that you know now, back in the 1900s?
Oh, yeah, in the 1900s. Well, electricity was coming. No, great question. I don't know if you heard it. What do I wish I knew when I was at SC that I didn't know that I do know now? That is a great question. I knew so little when I was here. I just loved movies, and I didn't really know anything about how they get made. So I needed to be here to get that information. I guess to me, like the one thing that I wish I knew more of is that there is no way to do it, that there is no path. There's only your path, right? So you couldn't and shouldn't try to mimic somebody else's path. You know, and I guess to me, what I wish someone had told me was, look, don't worry about whether you're gonna make it or not, because that's gonna happen or it's not gonna happen, right? And that success is basically made up of three things. It's hard work, it's talent, and it's luck, probably in equal measure. And there's only one of those that you can control, which is hard work. And so I know I'm not talented enough to not work hard, so I work my ass off. And the harder I work, the luckier I get. And that would be what I would offer up. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I just have a question about the villain. I got to know that gentleman in Taiwan back in 2014. He was doing a Danish movie, Northwest.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about his background in Hell's Angel and his whole his real thuggery like background.
Oh yeah.
And I was so happy to see him. I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've been doing press for about 2 weeks now, and I think I've had 3 questions about Roland, which is I think a joke because he's unbelievable. Roland Moller plays Korsbota in this, and I didn't know him until I saw Land of Mine, which is a Danish picture that was nominated for a bunch of stuff, and I think he was nominated for an award. It's like a 97-minute heart attack. So if you gotta watch this movie, Land of Mine, if you haven't. I think it's on iTunes. If you don't like it, I will pay for your iTunes thing. It's unbelievable.
That's non-binding.
Thank you.
I just want to step in and say.
But so Roland I saw that movie. Bo Flynn actually is like, you got to watch this thing, and I watched it, and I was like, who is this? We have to hire him. And so Roland grew up as hired muscle for drug dealers in Denmark. He was a legit thug, and he ended up going to prison for about 3 years for it. And when he got out of prison, somebody was making a movie about prison, and he was asked to be a consultant on it. And one of the lead actors who was cast in the prison drama was shit, apparently. And the director's like, hey, can you do it? And Roland stepped into that role, and he's like, look, I've been pretending to be tough my whole life. I can do it in front of a camera. And he did it, and he got nominated for some Danish award, and he was off and running. And he also has like this really cool sort of rap background, and he's just like he's like an animal. He's a wild animal.
While we're on the subject of international actors, and Hong Kong is such a character in this movie, and there are large swaths of this movie where you have actors speaking Chinese.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you, I mean, in a world where these kinds of movies, these blockbusters, are increasingly aimed at global audiences, how much of a consideration was that in the crafting of this movie? Did you sit down, was there a, hey, it'd be great is, let's not put the building in San Francisco, let's put it in Hong Kong. Is there a marketing or a financial aspect of that, or was this always where you were going to set the movie?
It was a great question. I was always going to set it in Hong Kong. Well, actually, I thought Macau for a second, and then I went and scouted, and Macau's like Reno. And I'm not gonna put the tallest building in the world in Reno, right? So Hong Kong all day long, and obviously, like, let's make no mistake, the Asian market, the Chinese market is the second biggest film market in the world, and it will soon overtake the U.S. So that wasn't that wasn't happenstance. That was part.
You didn't have to twist the studio's
no,
arm.
Well, no, that was part of the pitch. Like, you go in and like, here's where it's set, and of course Hong Kong is an incredibly vertical city, and it makes sense that you would build the tallest building in the world there. I knew I wanted to isolate Dwayne's character sort of further by language. Like, he doesn't speak the language, so he can't really stop and explain to somebody what's going on, and that he didn't kill anybody, and he's not involved in my family and all that stuff. But certainly when you go make a pitch like this. I can tell you for a fact when we said, and it's set in Hong Kong, set in China, like, you could almost see the dollar signs in the executive's eyes just kind of blink.
The
like
dollar signs that were already this big when Dwayne walked in were like,
it was kind of like that. But it was important to me that if we were going to set it there for whatever reason, both creative and kind of fiscal or financial, that we do it right? That we don't, because I've seen so many movies that will go nameless here tonight, where like they've wedged in some Chinese star in like the weirdest role imaginable, and they can't speak English really, and it just feels real cringy. And I think Chinese audiences are incredibly savvy. They're like an American audience. They know when they're being sold a bag of shit. So I didn't want to do that. And on the Cantonese stuff, so Byron Mann, who plays Inspector Wu, grew up in Hong Kong. And when he called me up, when he hired me, he's like, "All right, so what do you want to do with this?" And I'm like, "Well, I wrote that role like essentially like a gumshoe New York detective, and I'd like that. I want it to feel in the soil of Hong Kong." And he's like, "I'll be right back." And he has a buddy, a retired Hong Kong PD detective, and he worked with that guy to translate my English into Cantonese, but not only Cantonese, Hong Kong PD Cantonese, which is peppered with a few English American phrases. And so what we did was the first scene we shot with them is when Inspector Wu gets out of the car and is walking walking toward the trailer, and he meets the fire chief, who says it's burning, but there's nobody in the building. And we shot that, I think 3 or 4 times, maybe even 5 times in English, right? And I knew I wanted to shoot in English and then in Cantonese. And then we did one take in Cantonese, and it just crackled, right? And I jumped out of my chair. And I'm like, that's what we're doing. And from that point on, we did all Cantonese with 1 English safety. And we never actually cut in any of the English. It was never never even close.
Yeah, and for me, by the way, I mean, having never been to Hong Kong, I mean, that was one of the most fascinating things about the movie, despite the fact that, Rawson, did you direct a single frame of this movie in Hong Kong?
I did not. It was all Vancouver. We shot aerial and plate in Hong Kong and a couple of little second unit pieces. It's all Hongcouver.
I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I just want to say thank you, because the first part of that, I love action movies. That first scene where the guy had his son and he blew up, I just want to thank you for not having the blood and all that stuff.
You're welcome.
I really just want to thank you for that. But that scared the hell out of me. And it scared me, and I like the fact that you actually put that scene back in there at the end with his daughter. And and he lost the boy in the beginning, but he got to save his son at the end. So I really thought that was cool, how you put that in there.
Thank you for noticing.
I love the concept of that room. That was like, it was like going to a carnival thing on steroids.
Yeah.
Being in that the room, the mirror.
Carnival on steroids should have been the tagline for this movie.
Yeah, when you're a kid and you go in that in the room where all the mirrors and you can't tell where no one is and stuff. Yeah. That was cool. I really loved it.
Reminded me of Superman 2 a little bit.
Well, so not only Superman 2, sir. Superman 2, Lady from Shanghai, I think we all know. Orson Welles, 1947. Conan the Barbarian, Enter the Dragon. Most recently, John Wick 2. So there's a long history of sort of doing action sequences or set pieces in kind of a hall of mirrors. And I just kind of wanted to throw a little bit of tech on it. You know? So it was not just simple mechanical reflections, but panels, projection panels that you could have different angles, different lenses, different
8K
choices.
panels, no less.
8K, yes.
8K.
Future-proof. We wanted to future-proof the movie.
Future-proof. And you yes, you had a question too.
I think it would be fun to have everyone with their vitals being taken as they're watching the film.
Oh, yeah. You know what's... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, great film. But is there such a thing as a measurable footprint when you make films, like what it does to the environment? Like, is it easier to make like films that have more pollutants, for example, like in Hong Kong or another place other than the U.S.?
I don't think I quite follow.
No, I mean, I think what you're saying is during the production of a movie, like, are there sort of environmental considerations that the filmmakers take depending on where you shoot? So since this was shot entirely in Canada, I'm assuming that you were compliant with all the Canadian environmental rules and regulations.
Absolutely. Well, that's not only that. Canada doesn't mess around with the environment. Bless them. So we were there are many tiers of oversight in terms of the environment as you're making a film. A lot of I wouldn't quite call them restrictions, but a lot of guidelines and bylaws. Some of which are voluntary, some of which aren't. Certainly, Warner Brothers have made a couple films with them. Are incredibly green. There are there are sort of green officers, on movies from on Warner Brothers Pictures. So
we couldn't. On the New Line movie I made we couldn't have plastic water bottles.
Yeah.
They had to use refillable water bottles and
so
things like that's a Warner Brothers initiative, and
But back to your heart rate thing. What's been really for me, I'm bored as fuck watching this movie. I can't. I'm just like because it's all green screen to me. I've seen I'm scared of heights, but I can it doesn't do that for me. But what's been great is that people who've been watching it have been sort of tweeting at us their it's like a Fitbit challenge, their heart rate, and we have people, I'm not kidding, like 102, 104 just sitting watching a movie, which I just never even thought would happen, and so that's been kind of fun to see that. I mean, maybe these people are just deathly unhealthy already going in, but we'll take it, whatever. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad I've given you a phobia.
And it is available to screen in 3D.
It is, 3D. Sir, did you have a question over here? Sorry, you've been raising your hand.
Yes. How did you actually, because this story is an action film, but you could clearly tell that it was like a love of family, love for the family unit. How did you balance that in the film?
The balance between action and family?
Because you obviously had the line of "Daddy loves you," and so I was like, how did you balance that?
Well, that's a great question. I wish I was asked that more these last 2 weeks. But that's incredibly important, right? Because if you don't have that heart, right? If you don't have the family, then it's just a bunch of explosions and noise, and there's nothing to care about. There's nothing to root for. And the movies I loved growing up, the action movies I loved growing up, were always based in character and always based in having some heart, some rooting interest. And I think a lot of times in sort of bigger summer fare, they think louder is better, or look how many buildings we can knock down. And my eyes glaze over during that stuff. I don't personally like it. So it was it's a great question, and something that we took a lot of care in, not only in the writing of the script but also in the execution. And I guess the other thing to do is just cast great actors. Neve Campbell is incredible, one of the nicest people, but also can just she can do so much with her eyes, and so can Dwayne, and certainly Roland Moeller. But
yeah, I thought I was telling you before the screening was over. I thought that something that struck me about Dwayne in this movie is that he really he does seem vulnerable, both physically and emotionally in this movie, in a way that I don't really know that I've seen him before. And yes, of course, it's a big summer tentpole popcorn, satisfying, ballsy action movie, but that doesn't mean that there can't be, an emotional performance at the heart of it. And I thought that's where you really succeeded with him.
Yeah.
I think we have time. Thank you for your question. I think we have time for 2 more. So, yes, here.
I was wondering, what was the thought process behind giving Dwayne Johnson a prosthetic leg?
The thought process behind giving Dwayne a prosthetic leg. Well, I think Seth touched on it a little bit earlier. When you have Dwayne in a movie, his back's as wide as a coffee table. It's really, literally, just with the guy. It's really hard to make him vulnerable, to put forth a challenge onto someone that size, physically that size. That's why in a lot of his movies you will see Dwayne square off with like the offensive line from the LA Rams. You know what I mean? Like they bring, what we'll do? We'll just bring 5 guys kind of his size, but that's not the same thing.
Or the last one was like a big gorilla, right?
Yeah, like a 30-story werewolf.
Right.
And so certainly that part of it, trying to figure out a way to make your hero of his size vulnerable, taking away his leg, I think is a, if you'll forgive the phrase, a step in the right direction. And
I see what you did there.
Yeah, well, but
plus I got to say, maximum pucker moment for me is when he's got to reach up and get the leg before it comes off, and he's hanging off the side of the building. It's killer.
It's so funny because like last night at the Rusk Institute, there was one of the first questions was from this lady who says, "Why did you decide on a pin lock mechanism as opposed to a vacuum seal?" Right? And I have never been more happy to have done my homework in my life. And I'm like, well, the vacuum seal, it can tear, and if da-da-da-da-da, but also the pin lock, you know, when you're hanging by your leg, and it's going to go tick, 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 like that. And she's like, great, I have a pin lock. I was like, oh, whew. And,
you'll be safe hanging off the side of the building,
so
man.
So it was about vulnerability.
Yes, right here in the center.
Yes.
Hi, great movie.
Thank you.
Been following you on the gram, enjoying the moment. I wanted to ask, because I was a MFA here, and you always think, you know, you want to have a big movie because you have a big crew and all of that. You're a writer, director, and producer. How much control did you retain from the beginning to the end of the project?
Oh, great question. A lot, you know. Maybe too much, I guess. Look, when you have Dwayne Johnson, kind of, at your side and watching your back, you pretty much can do what you want, to a point. And I will say that Mary Parent, who's the head of Legendary, was unbelievably supportive of this film from its pitch stage. Like, and when we went around town to pitch it, we went to 10 places, and we got in a bidding war. And Mary Parent just sort of pot committed, right? Like, she's like this, and everyone else kind of like looked at their cards and folded. And then we made it with her. But that's the passion that she had for it and the belief that she had for it. The one thing that's interesting, and I hope everybody here gets to experience this, but as the sole writer director of a movie of this size, it's not really normal. Like, there are not very many writer directors of $100 million plus, summer tentpole fare. Typically, it's a director and there's a team of writers as long as your arm, right? And so what I've experienced so far is like roughly about 6 weeks out from shooting, they get nervous because they haven't brought in any other writers when they're used to that, and you got to kind of manage that little gap and that sort of narrowing, and then once you're going. So in this particular case, I got nothing but support. The notes that we got were typically very smart and helpful. And I think the thing that they saw early from the first cut that I showed Mary Parent was like the movie worked, and they liked it, and they felt like we were in good shape. And I think that more than anything is why I was kind of supported and not tormented in editorial. And typically, when that happens, at least in my understanding, when that happens to a director, if you get kind of fucked with, it's usually because the movie's not working from their perspective, if that makes any sense. So I had a lot of control, but when you ever make a movie this size, there's not, it's like being the quarterback on a football team, right? You get too much credit when it works and too much blame when it doesn't. You have a lot of support, Robert Elswit, et cetera, around you to help you do this thing.
Well, I think the measure of a movie, big or small, is does it deliver on what it sets out to do? What is the promise that the movie makes, and does it fulfill that promise? And I think that in no uncertain terms, the promise of a big, original, big swing for the fences, summer popcorn tentpole with heart, the likes of which they don't make much anymore, this movie delivers on and then some. So, Rawson, I want to thank you for making the movie, and I want to thank all of you for
your
letting
questions.
us be here tonight. Thank you so much.
You're the best, man. Thank you.